Well, Shabbat Shalom. We just want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. This is Barbara, and I'm serving as your host today. Today is the 29th day of the 5th month, and it's the 4th Sabbath. So we just want to welcome all our family and friends that are here. Many of you are here on the telephone or the Internet, or maybe you are listening to the recording. We want to welcome you today, too. And for more information about the Creator Sabbath, we ask that you go to the website, lunarsabbathday.com. There are a lot of articles there and videos, and also the events page. You can scroll down to the bottom and see the dates and the times that we gather together for Sabbath and new moons. There's also a calendar there about feast days. We'll be having our fall feast in September, and maybe some of you will be in October this year. But we just want to welcome everyone today, and now we're ready to start a discussion about the original timekeeping system. And if you can see the screen, or maybe you're watching this recording, you'll see it says a rebuttal to EliYah, discussing his article, Beware of the Lunar Sabbath, Part 2. And this is a rebuttal that Troy Miller wrote to EliYah, and it is a lengthy article. We're just going to cover a little bit of it today, and there will be points of discussion in here too. But last week was Part 1, and EliYah, this is on the Internet. When you Google Lunar Sabbath, this always pops up, Beware of the Lunar Sabbath. But Troy has a Hall of Shame on his website, and he wrote a really great rebuttal to all these objections to the Lunar Sabbath. And if you're new to the Lunar Sabbath, it's good to know these objections and good to know where in Scripture to go and look for an answer about why you're keeping Lunar Sabbath. So this EliYah had mentioned that he needed a proof, not just faith. And also we need biblical proof or 2 or 3 witnesses in Bible and history is what Troy responded with. And also we covered what is the Lunar Sabbath, and that people that are still keeping Saturday Sabbath are going with a 7-day continuous weekly cycle. And he says, and the Lunar Sabbath people are going by the phases of the moon. So he's telling you why you should not keep the Lunar Sabbath. And we are going to show you all the reasons that we can come up with that are in Scripture, and many more are in history when you study it out for yourself. Also, they also discussed last week about a new moon day being a third type of day, that it is a worship day. So let's see. Oh, I don't see my article up here now. Well, I'll have to pause. I must have deleted it somehow. Just a second. So I'll be reading the objections by EliYah. He's against the Lunar Sabbath, and he's telling people why they shouldn't study it and why they should be aware of it. And then Brother Peter from Tennessee said he would read Troy's response. And also Brother Gary in Tennessee said that he would read the writing that you see in red, that is Scripture, or maybe a definition from the Hebrew. So we're going to go to page 7 and start. We already covered the first 7 pages, so just be patient. I'm getting right to it. I had it already, and somehow I must have deleted it. I did have all the grandchildren here this morning for a couple hours while their mother had to run into town. So anyways, life is great, and I do love being a grandma, and I love the part that I have today for this Sabbath with you, fellowshipping with you guys. So here we are, page 7. So we're just going to continue on, and for the whole complete article about the rebuttal for this EliYah is on creationcalendar.com under Hall of Shame. And it is 87 pages, so it's lengthy. So we're just doing a little part of it today. And this is what Mr. EliYah says. And I guess that's not his real name, but that's what he's calling himself. And maybe some of you do know him and have met him before because he is a Messianic believer. But he was one of the first people that Brother Troy told about the Lunar Sabbath. So he didn't agree with it, but he does keep feast days. Okay, so here Brother EliYah is saying something
now
about the feast.
We're on pause.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I had my screen on pause. Thank you so much, Brother Peter. Okay, so we're at page 7, and where Brother EliYah says, Moedim, Scriptures Proving Lunar Sabbath. And that's the question. The Lunar Sabbath doctrine is primarily founded upon 3 key scriptures. These 3 scriptures are foundational to the Lunar Sabbath believer, and they will be prominently quoted on their websites and study papers when trying to prove their doctrine. One Lunar Sabbatarian says that they are the strongest points for this doctrine, and most others seem to agree. So since they are considered to be the strongest points, we should look to see if they are effective in establishing any facts. And the first scripture is found in the book of Genesis. And I'll have Brother Gary. Can you see it now, Brother Gary?
Yes. Then Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
Okay, and that's Genesis 1:14. So EliYah is going over the scriptures that we say why you should keep Lunar Sabbath. Okay, again, he continues, a Lunar Sabbath believer will quickly point out that the moon, being one of the lights in the firmament of heaven, was created for seasons.
And Troy pipes in, not without due cause, see Psalm 104:19.
And the word translated seasons in this scripture is the Hebrew word Moedim, which most everyone will agree means appointed times. Here is the Strong's Lexicon entry about Moedim.
4150, Moed. Moel. It says a feminine Moedah, 2 Chronicles 8:13. Moedah, from 3259, properly an appointment. Example, a fixed time or season, specifically a festival, conventionally a year, by implication an assembly as convened for a definite purpose, technically the congregation, by extension the place of meeting, also a signal as appointed beforehand, appointed sign, time, place of solemn assembly, congregation, set solemn feast, appointed due, season, solemn, solemnity, synagogue, set, time, appointed.
Now we will look at the second key scripture that Lunar Sabbath keepers say, the introduction to Yahweh's appointed times in Leviticus 23.
Leviticus 23, 1 through 3. It says, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say to them, The feast, 4150, of Yahweh shall be claimed to be holy convocations. These are my feast, 4150. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings.
The word translated feast in verse 2 is again the Hebrew word Moedim. Notice that the weekly Sabbath is chiefly listed among the Moedim. This is a very important scripture to the Lunar Sabbath believer. For them, it proves that the moon must be involved in setting the time of the weekly Sabbath.
Troy says, not without due cause. See Psalm 104:19.
Since the Sabbath is listed as one of the Moedim, along with the other festivals such as Passover and the Feast of Weeks later on in this chapter, in Genesis 1:14, says the moon is for Moedim, the logic of lunar Sabbatarians is that the moon must also be used to determine the regular weekly Sabbath. Let's now move on to the third and final scripture which lunar Sabbath believers use as the strongest points for their belief.
Psalms 104:19. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows it's going down.
And Troy says, Psalm 104:19 is not the strongest point. It's part of a progression of points. See Isaiah 28:9 through 10, which is at the heart of the third test for the truth listed on page 3 of this study. Genesis 1:14 says that either the sun or moon or both will regulate signs, seasons, days, and years. Psalm 104:19 is very specific. Which luminary in the heavens will regulate the Father's appointed times? In Leviticus 23:1 through 3, Yahweh twice calls the weekly Sabbath a Moedim. Precept must be upon precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, a little here, there a little.
Again, we have the Hebrew word Moedim in this verse, translated seasons. For them, this scripture points to rest any argument that the moon is not used to determine the weekly Sabbath, which is among the Moedim. On the surface, this might sound like pretty good logic. The moon, number one, the moon is for Moedim. 2, the regular Sabbath is called a Moedim in Scripture. 3, therefore the moon must somehow be used to determine the regular Sabbath.
Troy, I could not have said it better myself.
So, however, the above logic is not based on all the facts. It is important that we base our beliefs on the full counsel of Yahweh and not on whatever sounds plausible from just looking at a few scriptures and assuming we have the truth.
Troy, I agree. Now I await the evidence that we have somehow misused or misapplied Isaiah 28:9 through 10.
This logic does not center around the understanding that the moon is for Moedim. This logic centers around the belief that the moon must be used in setting all Moedim. It is very important to understand the difference.
Troy says, I have made this statement in the past, as have other lunar Sabbatarians. I doubt any still believe this to be the case, and I have no doubt that EliYah is about to offer conclusive proof that not all Moedim are regulated by the moon. When I made the statement in the past that if the moon is for Moedim, that must mean all Moedim, I meant in the context of the Father's appointed times, not for every instance where Moedim is used in Scripture. I have no doubt that other lunar calendar observers meant the same thing. Now our words, which have been taken out of context of the Father's calendar appointed times, are being used against us. I stand corrected. If I have to say it, I shall. When I made this statement in the past, I meant that all of the Father's calendar's appointed times are regulated by the moon, which is entirely validated in Scripture.
Okay, then Brother EliYah says, if there are examples in Scripture where the moon is not used to determine a Moedim, then their entire argument will fall to the ground. Why? Because if we have examples in Scripture where the moon is not involved in setting some Moedim, it proves that the moon doesn't necessarily need to be involved in the weekly Sabbath either. So let's take a look at Judges 20:38.
Now the appointed signal, Hebrews 41:50, between the men of Israel and the men in ambush was that they would make a great cloud of smoke rise up from the city.
Okay, in the above scripture, the word moed is translated appointed signal. Moed is a single form of moedim. It comes from the same Strong's lexicon word number. Obviously, since the appointed signal was making a cloud of smoke rise up from the city, we would have to conclude that the moon had no involvement in this moedim. Obviously, we can't use the moon to light a fire.
Troy says, agreed.
So, okay, now EliYah, the one that's against the Lunar Sabbath, says here the word is translated, Moedim, is translated appointed time.
Numbers 28, 2-4. Command the children of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food for my offerings made by fire as a sweet aroma to me. You shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time, and you shall say to them, this is the offering made by fire which you shall offer to Yahweh, 2 male lambs in their first year without blemish, day by day as a regular burnt offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, the other lamb you shall offer in the evening.
This is describing daily sacrifice in the temple or tabernacle. There were 2 lambs were offered daily, one in the morning and the other in the evening. Yahweh says, you shall be careful to offer it to me at their appointed time. And that is again Strong's 4150. The appointed time, or moed, here is morning and evening. The moon is not involved in determining the morning or evening, yet these are called moedim. This clearly demonstrates that some of Yahweh's moedim do not involve the moon at all.
Troy says, agreed. The daily sacrifice was a twice-daily event. It was not a date on the calendar. It happened every day. The moedim, appointed times, regulated by the moon, are based on the monthly cycle. The sacrifices mentioned here are on a daily cycle, based on the hour of the day, not the day of the month.
It is true that Yahweh did appoint the moon for moedim, but obviously not all of Yahweh's moedim, as Lunar Sabbath keepers indicate. Therefore, their assertion that all of Yahweh's moedim must involve the moon, and in parentheses, and thus the Sabbath must also involve the moon, is simply not true.
Troy says, contraire. It is an incontrovertible fact that the only Sabbaths that can be date identified in Scripture are on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, or the 29th days of the month. It is not just a mere coincidence that the quarter phase moon just happens to announce each of these dates.
Okay, and EliYah says to prove this point, that not all appointments are by the moon or Sabbath, he says consider the context of Psalms 104:19.
Psalms 104, verses 18 to 19. The high hills are for the wild goat, the cliffs a refuge for the rock badger. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knows it's going down.
EliYah says, if we choose to follow the belief of Lunar Sabbath keepers, it becomes evident that they are adding to Yahweh's inspired word when they say Yahweh appointed the moon for all moedim, and all moedim must involve the use of the moon.
And Troy says, we added nothing. The naysayers have added to our words. We meant the calendar appointed times. The Sabbath is a date on the calendar. Israel had a lunisolar calendar and lunar months. None of us meant that the moon regulates every moedim in Scripture. We knew better even as we said it. The moon has little bearing on when a woman gives birth or when the birds migrate, both called moedim, appointed times, that is, in Scripture. The horse is dead. Stop beating it.
Okay. So EliYah says, and we're almost done with the Moedim part. EliYah says, to prove this notion wrong, we need only to check the context of Psalms 104:19. He says, take a moment and notice closely the previous verse, which uses a similar kind of sentence structure. It says, the high hills are for wild goats. For a lunar Sabbath keeper to be consistent in his belief, consider the problem here. If Yahweh appointed the moon for all Moedim, and all Moedim must involve the moon, then, by the same logic, Yahweh also had to make the high hills for all wild goats, and all wild goats must use high hills.
Troy says, oh, brother, a poem of David's is being scrutinized several thousand years after it was written. I got a B in high school English for writing what I thought was some famous poem by Emerson meant. I still don't understand how you can get a B for saying what you think something means. But the standard raised by EliYah is even more ridiculous, forcing poetry to stand as a literal statement to the world. Relax, EliYah. You get a B for this particular argument on this issue. I'd give you an A, but it's neither original nor imaginative. Probably why I got a B in high school, friend.
Of course, EliYah says this. This is ridiculous, but it demonstrates the fallacy of being so dogmatic that all Moedim involves the use of the moon.
And Troy says, point well made. We concede the point, but you have yet to prove that the Sabbath is not by the moon. The Sabbath is a Moedim by your own admission, EliYah. Genesis 1:14 is not about goats romping around on the hillsides. It is a calendar statement. Yahweh said that the sun and or the moon would regulate the signs and seasons, that is appointed times, days and years. He said that the moon was specifically for the appointed times, that's in Psalm 104:19, and that the Sabbath was the first appointed time, Leviticus 12:1-3. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. So am I. That is Yah's standard, and he will hold you to it. Will you accuse him of being dogmatic? EliYah, either the sun or moon regulates the Sabbath. If not the moon, then it must be the sun. Read Exodus 31:13, Ezekiel 20:12, and 20:20, and understand that the Sabbath is not only a sign, Hebrew word ot, but also an appointed time, Hebrew word moedim, as discovered in Genesis 14, Psalm 104:19, and Leviticus 23:1-3. Genesis 1:14 clearly says that either the sun or moon will regulate these calendar events, signs, ot, seasons, moedim, days and years. You can go outside, look at the sun, and tell whether it is either Saturday or Sabbath. That's a question. If not, you're relying on the wrong light. Try the other one. The moon is a faithful witness, Psalm 98:37, and if its ordinances are forgotten, Israel will cease to be a nation before Yahweh forever. Jeremiah 31:35-36. EliYah, you will someday be grateful for our diligence, because if not for lunar Sabbatarians, Yahweh would not be returning to set up his kingdom on earth, because he is only returning for Israelites and those of the nations who have joined themselves to Israel by worshiping the Mighty One of Israel and keeping his law. If you doubt my words, read the prophecies for yourself.
Okay, and EliYah says, what we're looking at here in Psalms 104 is Hebrew poetry, not dogmatic, legalistic statements. Otherwise, you could even go on to verse 20 and find that all the beasts of the forest need to wake up and creep about at least once every night.
Troy says, oh, so So you did understand it was poetry, not literal. Then why are you holding this over our heads like a club? EliYah, I know firsthand that you are generally more gracious than this. I agree too. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west. The animals creep at night, the nocturnal ones, of course, but let's not quibble. And the moon announces the Sabbath. For thus saith Yahweh.
Okay, and then in summary, EliYah says, the assertion that all of Yahweh's Moedim must use the moon is simply not true.
Troy interjects, will you call Yahweh a liar then? Why don't you read Genesis 1:14, Psalm 104:19, and Leviticus 23, 1-3 again?
Okay. I lost my thought for a minute. Okay.
It's in the paragraph that starts with in summary and right after the green.
Okay. In summary. Okay. And it's after that. Okay.
In the middle of that paragraph. The meaning of the word, Moedim.
Boy, I got lost.
Uh-huh. Move your
okay,
cursor
the meaning
up.
of the word. Okay, got it.
Okay,
The meaning of the word. Sorry. You know what? I was writing a note about this Moedim that I've never really heard this complaint before about the Lunar Sabbath. Okay, in summary, the assertion that all of Yahweh's Moedim must use the moon is simply not true. The meaning of the word Moedim in Hebrew is broader than Lunar Sabbath keepers make it out to be, and when you examine their rigid interpretation of Psalms 104:19 more closely, it defines the basics of common sense.
Troy says, we know about the broad use of the word. What defies common sense is to keep annual Sabbaths based on the moon, just as Scripture says, but the weekly Sabbaths based upon the pagan papal week. When you come up with a good explanation for that, please email me at, and he gives his email address.
Okay, so then, yeah, and we know that EliYah is a feast keeper, and he does use the moon to count when the feast is. Okay, EliYah says, we do need to be careful about things like this. Anyone can pull a scripture out of context here or there, and it might appear to fit their theology. But in order to fully understand the meanings of Hebrew words, we need to consistently examine the meaning and context of various scriptures. When we do this, the true meaning comes to light.
Troy says, what have we pulled out of context? We applied Isaiah 28, 9-10, and followed the context to its logical end. We never stepped out of Scripture, never forced the text to say something it didn't say, and never added a jot or tittle to it. It's as plain as the ink on the page.
Yeah, in Isaiah 28, remember, is the verse that says precept upon precept, line upon line. Okay, so EliYah says, so for me, all of this begs the question, if these scriptures are the strongest points for the lunar Sabbath by the moon, and the interpretation given is obviously quite groundless, what does that say about their weaker points? In the absence of any scriptures telling us that the moon must be involved in the weekly Sabbath, there is no real scriptural basis for lunar Sabbath keeping.
Troy says, absence of any scripture? Come on, let's reason together. The evidence is there, you just don't like the end result of following the evidence to its singular end. You are a better student of Scripture than this, EliYah. We are a fourth of the way through our study, and you have yet to offer a single text that proves Saturday is the Sabbath, or that the Sabbath is every seventh day in an unbroken cycle all the way back to creation. If we are wrong, and you are right, shouldn't that have been your first order of business? Just as I pointed out early on, the naysayers try only to disprove the creation calendar, reject our understanding of Scripture without offering to support their conclusion with Scripture. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. Matthew 7:2.
Okay, so we'll stop right there for a minute. So everything that we've read so far, and it sounds to me like EliYah was saying you can't use the moon to say it's Moedim, it's appointed time, because there are some times that are Moedim, like morning and evening sacrifices, that are not by the moon. So he is disagreeing that Sabbath should be by the moon. So, okay, what have you guys been thinking while we're reading all this? Do you have a question or a statement or comment?
This is Christina. Can you hear me?
Yes, Christine. Hello.
Hi. I have been looking in the Ancient Hebrew Dictionary, and I was looking up the word appointed times, and let me see. I'm looking back there. I just learned how to use this. Okay, so appointed, and appointed time. So I found out that the word appoint in Hebrew, appoint, 134. I'm just sharing this with you guys. Let's see, 134. The word, it shows the pictograph. It would be a yod, ayin, and daled, which is the word ya'ad or yod. That means appoint. Sorry, and it means to arrange, fix, or set in place, to determine a set place or time to meet. And the word appointed, 671. This is in Jeff Benner's Hebrew Dictionary. 671. Just a little ancient Hebrew lesson here. I like to use the Hebrew Dictionary because often things we get a little more in-depth. Huh?
Okay. All right. Somebody else was speaking. Okay. Thank you, Christina. And somebody else has a comment?
Well, I had two more little words to explain to you.
Can you just summarize that quickly? And we'll...
Yes. Well, appointed is the word moed, and it means, the definition means persons, places, or things that are fixed or officially set. But the word appointed times is just a little different. I think it's the word eight, EYT. But it basically means the same thing. Page 837. 830. I'm almost done, real quick. Sorry I had to join you late. I still had to do a couple of things. Almost done here. It's the word EYT in Hebrew, appointed time. So they're actually appointed time. It means a fixed or officially set event, occasion, or date. And that's Strong's 6256. So the word the appointed times is the word 8 in ancient Hebrew. EYT. That would be the ayin and the tau. So just wanted to let you guys know that it's basically true that the Sabbath has been set by, in a firm way, in a set time by a thing, just like ancient Hebrew just said.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Anybody else have a comment about Sabbath being a Moedim, a set time, an appointed time by the moon? This guy is arguing against the Lunar Sabbath keepers, saying Sabbath is not a Moedim by the moon.
I think Troy is making a good point here, and he seems to be coming at it, looking for ways to disprove. One of the questions you've got, though, is we know, and he would readily admit, that that the Sabbaths are set by a Moed, but he has yet to offer what Moed. In other words, if there's a sign, if there's an appointment, how is that appointment established? For instance, when the men burn the city to send up smoke as a signal to the two portions of the army that they should coordinate their actions, that was a sign for them to coordinate. And obviously, God has appointed a sign that we and he are both coordinated on when the Sabbath is, that we are to meet.
That's right. A fixed person, place, or thing.
Okay, yes, and I think Troy does mention the phases of the moon are fixed signs that tell us when to meet for Sabbath.
Amen.
Was that what you were saying, Brother Peter?
Yes. Well, if EliYah is attacking that the moon is that sign and its phases are the sign, then he must offer something else in its place.
Okay,
or that word needs to be scratched out of Scripture. It has no purpose.
Okay, so he's not offering what's the sign for Saturday or the 7-day continuous cycle. He needs to firm up his position.
Correct.
And okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, anybody else have a comment? Have you heard anybody before say that Moedim being a Sabbath, being a Moedim, most of us came out of feast-keeping groups, and we did look for the sign of the moon to know when Passover was, and then in the fall we looked for the sign to know when Tabernacles was. But we did not know to look for the rest of the calendar and look for Sabbath on that same calendar. So we learned that the Sabbath was there in the calendar too.
I'll even offer one more thing there is EliYah apparently is a feast keeper, and he must establish then, or he must agree that Scripture defines by Moed when those feasts are, and those feasts have their Sabbaths. So in those cases, like Passover and the day as the meal comes into the Sabbath, he must acknowledge that that is established by the moon, the 15th day. So I'm kind of curious why he says some Sabbath. He has to agree that some Sabbaths are established by the moon, but he's going to pick and choose and have his other Sabbaths, his consecutive ones, that are apparently not, but that doesn't matter.
Right, yeah, that's a good point, yeah, because we know he's picking and choosing when his Passover will be by the signs in the heavens, but he's not looking at all the feasts, which Leviticus 23, 1-3 said that the Sabbath is a Moedim and the Sabbath is a feast. So this guy gives, if you're new to the Lunar Sabbath, you run across this on the internet, you read a little bit of this and you would just say, oh, I knew it wasn't true, and this is a good, this guy knows what he's talking about, and this guy really has a negative light on the Lunar Sabbath, and we need to be able to defend these things ourselves, because many of us have feast-keeping brothers and sisters that don't keep the Lunar Sabbath yet. And then he's going to go into pinpointing Sabbath, proving Lunar Sabbath. Okay, let's go a little bit into that. And then I think he goes into Scripture. Let me see. Oh, then we're going to go in 3 months in a row. So, Why don't we just read a couple more paragraphs and then we'll end this this part of the reading before maybe next time we can go into the scriptures that prove the Sabbath on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th. So EliYah, here's the next point he makes. Pinpointed Sabbath proving Lunar Sabbath? Question mark. The second of the strongest points for Sabbath by the moon are the places in Scripture that speak of Yahweh's Sabbath occurring on days of the month that lunar Sabbatarians consider to be the Sabbath. I don't see why it would even be a strong point to begin with, since there is a 1 in 7 chance of it happening within the weeks being independent of the moon cycle. It can happen almost twice a year on average. The fact that one of them would be mentioned in Scripture proves absolutely nothing.
And Troy says, if he moderated 3 years of calendar debate, 4 years of calendar debate on his website, EliYah knows better. The evidence is that the Sabbaths fall on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, and the 29th days of the month for 3 months in a row. This is not possible with the calendar model embraced by the Satyr Day Sabbatarians. If it only happened periodically, EliYah would have a claim. If he could show a weekly Sabbath that fell on a day other than these 4 calendar days, we would also have a claim. But he has nothing and offers nothing. Just as the naysayers who have gone before him, EliYah attempts only to gainsay Yahweh's creation calendar because it's all that they can do.
Okay, so we'll kind of stop there because he's saying, EliYah, show me a Sabbath in the Bible that is stated as a Sabbath that is not on the 8th, 15th, 22nd, or 29th dates of the month. Show me one of those. And all the Sabbaths that we can find in Scripture that are talking about the Sabbath day rest are on those dates. Yeah, let me see. Let me get one of those calendars up here right now. Oh, so shows the Sabbath as the 8th, 15, 22, 29. He's saying, EliYah, where are your verses in Scripture that say the Sabbath is not on those days? So any comments, anybody? There are some comments in the chat room here, I think by Linda. Okay, she's got, okay. So any more comments about Brother EliYah talking against Lunar Sabbath, turning people away from it? We have time for a couple more comments, and then we'll close the recording for this week.
I will say that at this point that EliYah has just stated that if you can show me where the Sabbath is on those days of the month, 4 in a row, spanning into 2 months is what he's saying, that it would disprove his point. And I think Troy's point right there, they didn't state it exactly that way, is there is that evidence in Scripture as he will be portraying further down.
Yes, and that is next, is showing the Scriptures of 3 months in a row. And it's really firm. 2 months in a row are definitely firm there in Scripture of the same exact dates in a row, which doesn't happen on a Gregorian calendar. You know, maybe I think leap year, March and February have some of the same dates, but you can't do 2 months in a row unless it's on a lunar calendar where your Sabbaths are 8, 15, 22, and 29. So is that what you were saying, Brother Peter?
Yes. In other words, what we're about to go into is that data does exist. And that, in a sense, that by EliYah's own admission, that defeats his argument. He basically says, if you can show me that, then my argument doesn't stand.
Okay, well, let's just go into a little bit of that verse so the people that are following this recording can see the Scripture. Okay, and we won't go in the whole 3 months in a row, but we'll go through just this little bit of a summary. EliYah says, for a lunar Sabbath doctrine to be established, one would need to prove that the Sabbath was on a particular day of the month for 2 months or more in a row. This would be impossible with the recurring weekly cycle. But in spite of valiant efforts by lunar Sabbatarians, they have yet to prove such a thing. If anyone thinks they have, I feel free to contact me. But that doesn't make sense because we can clearly prove it in the scriptures. Go ahead, Brother Peter.
Okay, Troy says, month 1 of the year of Exodus, Israel was delivered from Ramesses, the capital of Egypt, on the Sabbath of Abib 15, the morrow after the Passover, Exodus 12, Numbers 33:3. They did not know it was the weekly Sabbath at the time, but it was certainly revealed as a weekly Sabbath later. The first part of Exodus 12:16, it says this regarding the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we all know is from Aviv 15 to Aviv 21. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and in the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation to you. Aviv 21 is not a high Sabbath. The first day of the feast and the 7th day of the week in context are one and the same. The 21st is the 6th day of the week, and of course the 7th day of the 7-day feast. But when this 7th day is mentioned in Exodus 13:6, it's called a Chag. That's Hebrew 22:82, which is used 62 times in Scripture and is only used to refer to the pilgrimage feast days found in Exodus 23:14 through 17. In this case, Aviv 15, the first day of unleavened bread, but the 7th day of the week. This Chag cannot refer to the last day of the feast. Prove it in a moment. And he continues on. Do you want to keep going here, for sure?
Yeah, let's see. And then the second, month 2, why don't you read that paragraph and maybe we'll kind of close there.
Okay.
So we have month 1 there when they came out of Egypt on the 15th day of the first month. And here is month 2.
And Troy says, month 2 of the year of Exodus. Yahweh met with Moses on the 15th, Exodus 16:1, and said that they would get quail that evening, that is of the 15th, Exodus 16:8 and 16:12 through 13, and manna the next morning, that is the 16th, Exodus 16:8, and for the 6 days following, as stated in Exodus 16:5. They were to pick up a daily amount each day except for the 6th day of the week, when they were instructed to pick up a double portion, as stated in Exodus 16:5, 16:22, and 16:26, because the morrow was the Sabbath, as told to us in Exodus 16:23 and 16:26. The days of gathering manna were are numbered above. Look just like this, and it shows the Creator's calendar with the last days being the 15th and the 22nd. And he says if the 22nd is a Sabbath, so is the 15th, and that's the important point.
Okay, so we have month 1 where they came out of Exodus, out of Egypt, and then the exact date. And then month 2, we know manna was on the first day of the week, and that shows Sabbath as the 15th. And we'll just go over month 3. We'll get this evidence out there on the table.
All right. Troy says, month 3 of the year of Exodus. Exodus 19:1 proves that the children of Israel arrived at Sinai on the 16th day of the 3rd month. Please read the context. Moses indicates that the children of Israel rested at Rephidim, the 15th of the 3rd month. The root word for Rephidim means rest, And this passage says that they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai, the same day of the month on which they left the land of Egypt, 2 months earlier. If you remember, Israel got as far as Succoth on the 15th, which is still within the borders of Egypt, and actually left Egypt on the 16th, the following day. That's from Numbers 33, 3 through 6. Jubilees 1:1 is a second witness. And it reads, "And it happened on the first day of the exodus of the children of Israel," and it happened in the first year of the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt, in the 3rd month, on the 16th day of the month, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Ascend to me here on the mountain, and I will give to you the 2 stone tablets of the law and the commandments, as I have written them. Thou shalt make them known." So Israel arrived at Sinai on the 16th, and Moses was initially summoned up the mountain. Yahweh told Moses to go back down the mountain and tell the people to consecrate themselves, for on the 3rd day, the 18th, he would come down on the mount in a cloud. That's Exodus 19, 10 through 11. If the 18th is the 3rd day, then the 16th is the 1st day, meaning that they were resting in Rephidim on the Sabbath, the 15th, which is the weekly Sabbath. The days of the week are numbered above look like this, and he shows again the next month, showing the 15th and the 22nd being the Sabbath, the 7th days of the weeks. Amazing, isn't it? There's always harmony in the truth. Not to be ignored is the fact that any time the 15th or the 22nd is the Sabbath of a given month, so are the 8th and the 29th, which looks like this. And he shows a full month, showing the 8th, 15th, 22nd, 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th being the Sabbath days, the last days of the week.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, so Troy shows here. Remember, EliYah says you can't show me 2 months with the same dates in a row. And there's scripture evidence here of 3 months that have the same dates in a row, and you can only do that on a lunar calendar. So we're just going to stop, I think, right there. Any comments about that? I thought that was a lot of good evidence, and it was. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to comment that the Ruach spoke to me when he was talking about the word, how they rested on the 15th. Now, that is our translation in our country, but in Hebrew, it is the word, it means to seize for a special occasion, to seize or stop, and that's what the word shab means in Hebrew. That's where we get the word Shabbat from. They seized and they stopped for a special occasion. They didn't just stop to rest, they seized. Shab.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Christine, and that's a great point.
Yes, I learned that a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
That means to seize.
All right.
And yeah. It's exciting.
Well, any more? Yeah, it is exciting. Any more comments? And Christine, and like many of us, we have other friends and family that keep trying to show us where you're wrong and show me this in the Bible and show me that. And this is a really good rebuttal because EliYah is telling people, beware of the lunar Sabbath. Don't go study that stuff. It's not true. The Sabbath is not a Moedim. It's not kept by the moon. It's not a signal by the moon. And the scripture shows us that it is. It's there for seasons. It's there for Moedim. And the Sabbath is a feast day. So, any more comments before we close the recording today?
I want to mention one thing is Troy's discussion about the first month, and he makes a comment about the 2 Sabbath rests with respect to this week as being one and the same. I don't know if I go there with him. I'll have to listen to what he said and go look at that. That was not my understanding. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay.
I agree with his overarching argument, and yes, it does not interfere with his argument of the contiguous, well, that's not a proper word, but that the Sabbaths are continuing on the same days of the month, 3 months in a row. That still stands.
Okay. All right. So another comment from anybody before we close the recording? But we'll stay around for a conversation after I close it.
I agree. It kind of stood out strange to me when I heard that those two Sabbaths were one and the same, or those 2 days.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to, let's see, if you're listening to the recording, I'm going to put our website up there, and I'm going to say Shabbat Shalom. Oh, we'll be back tomorrow. Linda Alvarado will be here with a presentation. And tomorrow is New Moon Day. For us, it'll be the 6th month, and maybe for some of you, you're on day month 5, but we're on the 6th month. So we'll be back tomorrow at the same time and same place. And if you're getting ready to make a comment, hold on just a minute. Let me close the recording.